Okay.
So Jerry, we have the second day of the 15th Water Conference, International Conference of the Physics, Chemistry and Biology of Water, in German Bad Soden. For me, you know, it's always a huge pleasure to be in your conferences.
Thank you.
It's the third one, and it's always a huge inspiration for me. Sometimes I don't understand the half of the scientific presentations, but it's okay as well. But I wanted to know what, from your point of view, actually was the highlight of this conference, or highlights in general?
It's thank you for asking, but first on the principle of not understanding, that has more to do with the presenters than it has to do with the listeners. Sometimes, you know, any subject could be made understandable if the presenter takes the time to think about the audience and the audience members. So you shouldn't feel in any way deficient because, you know, I've been in this field for many years. I don't understand half of it either.
Thank you so much.
No, the issue is that presenters need to take the time and make the effort to present clear presentations. And there's so much that's been presented already. We're only basically halfway through the conference. And so the ones that have made the most impact, I think, were the ones that have been most recent, that we just came from a session. And some of the results are so interesting because, so for example, the presentation that we just heard by Daniel Fels, showing that if you have some cells in a compartment surrounded by other cells, then the cell in the middle feels something, even though chemically isolated from the cells around it, it feels something from those cells, because the growth of the cell or cells in this compartment depends on how many that you have outside. It's astonishing. Whoever would think of this, and it's not a chemical communication. It's some kind of, it appears to be some kind of electromagnetic communication. So the cells outside are communicating somehow, and the cells inside, cellular cells, are receiving this apparently electromagnetic communication, telling them what to do. You know, shall we divide, shall we multiply, whatever. It's astonishing, you know, who would ever think of this kind of communication, but he's been making such measurements now for quite a few years under actually difficult situations. It's not a university laboratory. He has to scrape to bring things together, but he's done it, and the results are amazing. So this is one of the I think really interesting results. And then the one just before that, I'm giving you only the two most recent communications that are so interesting for me. So Kirsten Deutschlander, obviously from Germany, yes. Deutschlander, presented her work on patients drinking different kinds of waters, artesian water, tap water, various waters, and she has a clear demonstration that your health depends on the kind of water that you drink. Well, we sort of known that for many years, for a long time, and she thinks, and I think as well from other kinds of considerations, that it has to do with the amount of EZ water that is contained in the water that you drink. And the artesian waters generally contain a lot of EZ water. So for me, it was no surprise that drinking this kind of water has a positive, beneficial, strongly beneficial health impact that's statistically significant. I've been talking about this for quite a few years, that if you want to keep healthy, one of the ways to do it is to drink water that contains an appreciable amount of easy water. Well, she demonstrated that was the case. So for me, this was a wonderful presentation, and she presented it in a really interesting way. So if you ask me what are the most interesting presentations, I have a tendency to forget the earlier ones because I listened to the later ones. Oh yeah, so just one more. May I have another?
Yes, of course.
Today's #1 presentation, the greening of the Sahara Desert. If I had not seen or heard about this before, it would have blown my mind. Can you imagine converting the desert into a place full of greenery, trees, bushes, fruits, vegetables?
There were 2 men, father and son.
Father and son, right, father and son. The father is the one who's responsible. The son is following, not exactly in the father's footsteps, but he's been following his father since he was a kid, and now he's a psychiatrist. And his father was unable to come, and so he nominated his son to come. And we decided it was a good idea. So his son came, and his father was presenting remotely. And his son presented in a clear way what the father has done. So what he's done, he's taken the methodology developed by Wilhelm Reich. He was a psychiatrist who studied with Freud, and he's responsible for actually many different innovations. Some of the innovations seemingly oddball, remote, I don't know what to call it, and highly controversial. So Wilhelm Reich's books were burned when the Nazis came, dominated, I guess it was Vienna. It was Vienna. His books were burned, and then he moved to the U.S. And the U.S. government decided also to burn his books. So his books were first burned by the Nazis, and then burned by fellow Americans, which means he must have had something really interesting to say.
Revolutionary, yes.
Revolutionary, because if both factions took it upon themselves to burn his books, so he remains controversial. And one of the findings of his had to do with a certain kind of energy called orgone energy. I think there are many features of orgone energy that are very similar to easy energy. I'm not sure, but anyway, that's just background material. But he devised something called a cloudbuster, and the cloudbuster is an apparatus that consists of parallel tubes made of metal, and I just learned that metal needs to be magnetic metals. And the tubes are long tubes that are lined up parallel, and the back ends are connected to water, and the front ends are pointed up to the sky. And where you're pointing these tubes, eventually clouds form. It's not exactly clear how clouds form. Originally, it was said to something due to the orgone energy. Today, the presentation, it seemed he was talking about electromagnetic energy because he was dealing plus charges, minus charges, and discussing it. But at any rate, it works. And the demonstration that it works is he showed pictures of some regions in the Sahara some years ago that were pure desert, and now they're fully green. So he has a lot of motivation for doing this. The obvious motivation, is to produce fruits and vegetables for people to eat, where it doesn't exist, hadn't existed before, but now it does. The secondary motivation, which he mentioned today, was many people from Africa, from Central Africa, poor people lacking in so much, are migrating northward toward Europe. And these people are inundating the capacity of Europeans to accommodate them. And so by creating a green belt across North Africa, the idea is that these people begin their migration. But suddenly they come upon a green belt and they notice, there are fruits, there are vegetables, I can reach out grab an apple from the apple tree and start eating? Why should I move to Europe with the uncertainties when I can stop here and have plenty to eat, plenty to keep me going? So anyway, he presented this today, his first presentation in the day, and I think everybody was blown away as much as I was. This is absolutely phenomenal.
It can change a lot, definitely. It can change a lot.
It can change so much. Yeah, absolutely. And you know, it gives me special pleasure to gather these people around. Because people are coming to this conference with different backgrounds, and I try my best to gather these people, to accumulate and speak to one another, because they have something to learn from one another, and they have so much to teach the rest of us. And many of these presentations, both the science and the technology, are not accepted by the mainstream. And so the people who come here to present have almost no opportunity for mainstream conferences. And if they go, they occasionally do present mainstream conferences, someone will raise their hand and say, oh, this is the biggest nonsense I ever heard, you know, and then walk out the door. But here, this is welcome.
But I had the pleasure to announce you yesterday before your lecture, and you have been talking about something what you actually, I think, mentioned the first time here in this audience, and it was a very inspiring lecture about the connection between volcanoes and earthquakes and the easy water. Please tell the Polish audience a few sentences more about that, because for me it was something amazing, and I understood almost a lot. So
well, thank you.
I was very happy.
Even I understood it. Yeah, so, okay, a few sentences. Yeah, that is what I presented yesterday. I've been asking myself about these two phenomena. You know, living in the Northwest in Seattle, we've had a lot of experience both with volcanoes and with earthquakes, and we were unfortunate enough, or fortunate enough, depending on how you look at it, to have experienced Mount St. Helens. That was more than 40 years ago, and I remember the day it blew. It was expected to blow. It's almost in sight of Seattle. If you're in the right position and the atmospheric conditions are okay, you can almost see it. It's about 150 miles or so from Seattle. And a Sunday morning, 40 odd years ago, it blew. It was like the day that Kennedy was shot. Everybody remembers exactly what they were doing when they heard the news. It was so shocking, even though we expected it. So, you know, a lot of people in my region think about volcanoes and earthquakes. So it's an earthquake-prone region. It was in 2001 that we had a fairly major earthquake. And I remember I'd written a book in 2001, Cells, Gels, and the Engine of Life. And someone from the university came to interview me. I was sitting in my office at the university, and the last question he asked is you know, suppose you were right in all this book, what would be the consequence? And then the earth shook. And I thought, oh my goodness, you know, earth shaking kind of, it was just the right time that the earth shook. So anyway, the earth shook, but we've heard much more. There was an article that was presented in New Yorker magazine. Recently, the geologists figured out that the region where I live has been subjected to huge earthquakes every 300 years. And we're now at year 375 since the last one.
Okay.
So it means that we're overdue for an earthquake of magnitude not 6, not 7, not 8, 9.1. And if this occurs in our lifetime, it will probably be the end of our lives in Seattle, because we'll be inundated by a 100-foot tsunami.
But we never know.
We never know.
We never know.
No, so, you know, we're feeling optimistic about...
But
about
easy water. The easy water.
Yeah, okay, I'm sorry. So I'm a bit distracted. Okay, so of course, I'm thinking a little bit about... so if you think about easy water, forget this background material for the moment. If you think about easy water, typically what happens is you have a material here, and you have a boundary of the material, the surface of the material, and we find that if water molecules meet this surface, they undergo a transformation into easy water, and it's a hexagonal sheet that builds. And the first hexagonal sheet then serves as a template for the growth of the second sheet, which is the same as the first, and so on. And so these sheets, these hexagonal or honeycomb sheets, grow one by one from the surface outward. And it turns out that, from measurements, that beyond this region are positive charges, protons. And the way you can look at it, the reason for this is that easy starts to grow from ordinary water. Water's neutral. Easy is typically negative. So you can't go from something that's neutral to something that's negative. There must be positive charges somewhere else. Otherwise, you're creating a negativity from neutrality. It's impossible. So we found that the positive charges are out here beyond the EZ. Now, these positive charges are freely mobile. They can move around at will. The EZ is actually stuck to the surface. So you have something, a boundary, some material, gel-like material that's stuck to the surface. And beyond it are these positive charges, which, by the way, incidentally, are stuck to water molecules. It's not so important. But, you know, they repel each other. And if you have a bunch of positive charges out here that are repelling each other, all they want to do is get away from each other. So it's like if you were to take a jar and stick these positive charges into the jar and then put the plug on the jar, they would exert huge pressure. You know, it's like a champagne bottle. You know, you pull the cork and so I'm thinking, is it possible that this is the energy that's responsible for the creation of earthquakes and volcanoes? You know, volcanoes, the energy, what comes out shoots up, and it turns out that this contains huge amounts of water. That's clear. I mean, one of the recent eruptions, they measured the amount of water that was coming out, and they concluded that the amount of water that came only from this volcano increases the humidity around the world by 5%. Amazing, huge amounts of water. And then the next question is it just water or is it charged water? Well, if you look on the internet at pictures of volcanoes, you'll see that every second one shows lightning discharges inside the volcano. So the volcano is not only spewing out water along with molten rocks and such, but also it's charged. You know, so those are two. Energy. Yeah, huge energy and hints that somehow charged water is involved. And so that's why I think it may be that this charged water is like as I said in the champagne bottle, but much higher density of positive charges that are fueling the eruption of a volcano. And the same with the earthquake. So if you have two surfaces, and the surfaces like two pieces of sandpaper with the sand facing it, or you try to do this, it's impossible. But if you separate it, then any strain on this could be relieved immediately because there's no friction anymore. So what is it that can relieve the friction? Well, if you have water in between, and there's lots of water down there, if you have water in between, and if EZ is developing on this surface and on this surface, in between are these positive charges. You get enough positive charges, they separate the surfaces, and if you separate the surfaces of the sandpaper, then the two pieces of sandpaper can move with impunity, no problem, back and forth. It's very simple. So I'm thinking earthquakes and volcanoes have a tendency to occur in the same locations. If you look at the ring,
you showed on the presentation.
I showed a slide demonstrating the locations, and there's a huge, and so if they occur at the same place, it suggests that the energy of the two places is similar, and one possible source of energy is exactly, it comes from the EZ, it comes from the product of the EZ, which is the positive charges that are created as EZ is created. And EZ is created, you need energy, you need, for example, infrared energy, as we know from our experiments. This is what creates it. And so I think that it's possible. This is a speculation, but you know, it's something that needs to be researched. The speculation that what's going on is that the infrared energy, which is certainly present down in the Earth because the temperature is known to be high down there, so it's got a lot of infrared energy, and it's also known that there's lots of water down there. It's called primary water, and it's not the surface water, it's not the ocean water, it's below, well below that, and it's been known for 100 years. There are huge amounts of water down there. So it might be that this primary water is what is responsible for creating the energy that's responsible for creating the earthquakes and also the volcanoes. There's one more point, but I think you probably want to ask me another question. I'm not sure.
No, please.
Well, continental drift.
What about it?
Well, suggestion is that the same force is creating that. So you know, continental drift. If you try to piece together the continents, it turns out like pieces of a puzzle that they actually can be put together into one land mass. And this was first conceived by a guy named Alfred Wegener 100 years ago. And people thought he was nuts, either drunk or on some kind of drug or something. Or how could this be? He said the continents are drifting apart. How could they drift apart? But the evidence came in later showing that, for example, on the east side of South America and the west side of Africa, which could fit together like puzzle pieces, you could find a certain unusual fossil here and the same fossil here. But now these are separated by a huge ocean. How is it that you can find the same fossil here and the same fossil here? Just exactly where they would piece together. So this was found in multiple locations. If you put the continents together, you get an overlapping right across the boundary of the continents of different fossils of plants and animals. And so he then his point of view became accepted. But the question is, what's the driving force? If continents were pretty well pieced together, maybe with some small bodies of water in between, what pushed them apart? Hypothesis, the same force that I'm talking about, the protons that form as EZ water forms. And people don't understand the huge amount of force and pressure that can be developed by these protons when they're really close together. You know, force depends on distance. Actually, it depends on the inverse square of the separating distance. So when you get closer together, the force is stronger, and when you get closer and closer, it's much, much, much stronger. It's not just a little stronger. So when you put all those together, when the protons accumulate, the force is absolutely enormous. And you know, when you think about the Earth being around for I don't know how many billions of years, and not millions of years or thousands of years, but billions of years, it's a lot of time for these forces to act. You know, and if I'm pushing you, you may not respond too much. But if I keep pushing you, I may push your chair, and you might move a little. If I keep pushing the chair, you're going to wind up on the other side of the town, right? Not here. So, yeah, it depends how heavy you are, and you're very light, so it will be very.
And so on.
Yeah.
You know, when I'm listening to you, Jerry, it's always amazing that you are never tired, I think, of being curious about life and about processes in life. It reminds me also, and it's actually the last question of our talk. Remember, we were on the plane to Tuscany, and we have been talking about several things, but we have been talking also about the possibility, because you know that I'm doing also frequency therapy, and in my approach we are saying that the frequency therapy is increasing the cell membrane potential, and that's why people are getting better, putting in the simplest way. But we both have been talking about that actually maybe, and we had the hypothesis that maybe the frequency therapy is increasing easy water in the organism, and that's why people are getting better. And I hope that one day we will come back to the conversation.
This is a really interesting hypothesis. So I think there's a good chance that you're right about that. That the technique is exactly what it's doing. In today's presentation, I think it was Kirsten Deutschlander, basically equating easy to health. The more easy that you have in the cell, the healthier you are. And so this is the kind of central focus in terms of all kinds of health, that a cell will function as it's supposed to function if the cell is filled, if the cell is hydrated, you might say, which means it's, in my terms and her terms, it's filled with easy water. So this would be the first place to look. If the FSM is creating health, all kinds of measures of health, a good hypothesis is that it's creating easy water, building easy water in some way. I think there's a good chance that it's true. I wish we had the means and the funding and whatever to pursue that, or somebody else who's deeply into it, like yourself and your colleagues. I think it needs to be studied and should be studied. So I think you're onto something really important. And the fact that it's so useful and so helpful in improving health, for me, it points to the likelihood that the mechanism is exactly as you suggested, that it's the build-up of easy water.
We will see. We will see. I hope we will find a way to just have some research about that. And for now, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
For the wonderful conversation as always.
Yeah.
And I wish us both and all the people around us to have next 2 days of amazing inspiration and wonderful conference.
Thank you so much. It's been that way for the past couple of days,